You won't believe what slipped past the editors of Back to the Future. Hidden in one of the movie's most famous scenes is a mistake so big it should have been impossible to miss, yet it stayed in the final cut for the world to see. This scene isn't edited, it isn't fixed, and once you spot it, you'll never watch the film the same way again. Let's take a closer look at this unforgettable blooper. The birth of a time-traveling classic. Back to the Future was not just a movie. It was a dream that started in 1980 when two friends, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, sat together and asked a simple question. What if you could go back in time and meet your parents when they were young? That single thought became the seed for a story that would change Hollywood forever. When they started taking the script around to studios, the response was nothing but cold doors shutting in their faces. Over 40 studios said no. The main reason was not because the story was bad, but because it was not raunchy enough. At that time, Hollywood comedies were filled with adult jokes and over-the-top content. Things changed only after Robert Zemeckis directed Romancing the Stone in 1984, which turned into a hit. Suddenly, Zemeckis was no longer the struggling filmmaker being turned down. He was the man who had proven he could deliver a box office success. That is when Universal Pictures finally gave Back to the Future the green light. But getting a studio on board was only the first challenge. Casting became another uphill battle. From the start, Zemeckis and Gale wanted Michael J. Fox to play Marty McFly. He had the right mix of charm, wit, and youthful energy. The problem was that Fox was already busy with his TV show Family Ties, and the producers of the show refused to release him. With no other option, the role went to Eric Stoltz. For a few weeks, production moved forward with Stoltz as Marty. Yet something did not feel right. He was a good actor, but he was not bringing the lightness and humor the character needed. Marty McFly was supposed to be fun, relatable, and slightly mischievous, and Stoltz was playing him too seriously. After a difficult decision, Zemeckis decided to recast the role, even though it meant reshooting weeks of work and spending millions more. By April 1985, filming wrapped up, but the challenges were far from over. The release date had been set for July 3rd, just in time for the summer crowd. That left a very tight window for editing and special effects. Some effects were not fully polished by the time it hit theaters. But the audience did not seem to care. The response was explosive. Back to the Future earned $381.1 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of 1985. Critics loved it, families adored it, and teenagers found in Marty McFly a character they could look up to. The film's theme song, The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News, became a chart-topping hit, and the DeLorean time machine entered pop culture as one of the most iconic vehicles in movie history. Years passed, and the love for the film only grew stronger. In 2007, the U.S. Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, cementing it as not just entertainment, but a piece of American cultural history. Few films reach that kind of legacy. Back to the Future was not just a blockbuster of its time, it became a timeless story that spoke to generations. Yet, as perfect as it seemed on the screen, the journey behind it was far from smooth. Casting changes, endless rejections, and sleepless nights shaped the film we now see as flawless. And while audiences were laughing, cheering, and quoting lines from Marty and Doc, there was something brewing off-screen that would soon make Hollywood history in its own way. Let me tell you about the actor whose absence led to one of Hollywood's strangest and most bitter legal battles. Faces, lawsuits, and Hollywood's identity crisis. For many fans of Back to the Future, George McFly was a character they instantly recognized. Played by Crispin Glover, George was awkward, nervous, and yet somehow lovable. His transformation from a timid man to someone who stood up for himself was one of the most satisfying parts of the first film. Glover's performance brought humor and heart to the story, making George an important piece of Marty McFly's journey. But when Back to the Future Part 2 arrived in 1989, something was off. George McFly was still there, yet something about him looked strangely unnatural. Audiences at the time may not have noticed it immediately, but what they were actually seeing was not Crispin Glover at all. It was another actor, Jeffrey Weissman, wearing prosthetics that had been created from a mold of Glover's face. At first, many assumed that Glover had refused to return for the sequel. But the truth was more complicated. Glover later explained that he had wanted to come back, but he was offered much less money than other cast members. On top of that, he had strong creative disagreements with the filmmakers about the story. In particular, he disliked the ending of the first movie, where Marty comes back to a better life with a nicer house and car. Glover felt it sent the wrong message, suggesting that money equals happiness. When negotiations fell apart, the producers decided to move forward without him. But instead of hiring a different actor and leaving it at that, they chose a path that would change Hollywood forever. Using the face mold they already had of Glover from the first film, they applied it to Weissman and tried to pass him off as the same George McFly. When Glover discovered this, he was furious. He did not object to the idea of someone else playing the role. What bothered him deeply was that his face was being used without his consent. In his own words, "Had they only hired another actor, that would have been totally legal and I would have been completely fine with that. But using his likeness crossed a line." So Glover took action. He sued the filmmakers, and the case eventually settled. The legal battle forced Hollywood to confront an issue that had not been clearly addressed before. Who owns an actor's face? Can a studio use your likeness once you have left a project? Where does creative freedom end and personal rights begin? The case had a lasting impact. After Glover's lawsuit, contracts for actors began to change. Studios started including detailed clauses about how an actor's image and likeness could be used. What happened with George McFly in Back to the Future 2 became a turning point that still shapes the entertainment industry today. And the timing of it all feels even more important now. In the modern world of digital effects, artificial intelligence, and deepfakes, the question of likeness rights is everywhere. If studios can digitally recreate someone's face, or even bring back actors who have passed away, what rules should protect performers? Crispin Glover's fight back in the late 1980s was not just about one role. It was about drawing a line that is still being debated in Hollywood more than 3 decades later. Looking back, the controversy shows how even the most beloved films can have a darker side. Behind the laughs, the sci-fi wonder, and the family fun, there were real struggles about fairness and respect. For Glover, the decision to replicate his face without permission was not just a creative choice. It was personal. And for Hollywood, it was a wake-up call that technology could be powerful, but it also needed limits. Practicing with a guitar. Later it was riding horses or learning how to handle guns. He did not want to fake it for the camera. He wanted it to feel real. One of the best examples of his dedication came in the famous school dance scene. Marty steps onto the stage and launches into Johnny B. Good, shocking the 1950s audience with a performance that feels decades ahead of its time. To make this moment believable, Fox worked with guitar teacher Paul Hansen, who broke down the solo piece by piece. Even though the music had already been recorded, Fox learned it note for note so that his fingers matched perfectly with the sound. The guitar solo alone was not enough. Fox also studied the moves of classic rock stars to make his performance look authentic. He practiced jumps, slides, and kicks until they became second nature. Then he worked with a choreographer to blend those movements into a sequence that captured the spirit of rock and roll. When he finally performed it on set, the result was unforgettable. Fans cheered, critics praised it, and decades later, it is still one of the most celebrated moments of the trilogy. But the guitar was just one of many challenges. For the first movie, Fox had to master skateboarding. At the time, skateboarding was still seen as a street activity for kids, not something polished for film. To pull off the stunts, he worked with experts, pushing himself to ride and balance with ease. By the time the cameras rolled, he looked as if he had been skating for years. In Back to the Future Part 3, Fox had to take on completely different skills. The story moved to the Old West, and that meant horses, lassos, and guns. Once again, he trained hard to look convincing. Whether he was galloping across the dusty set or holding a weapon in a tense standoff, Fox's preparation made it feel natural. What is striking about his effort is how much of it he later admitted to forgetting. He laughed about it, saying he picked up 1,000,000 different skills, but could no longer do most of them. That only highlights how demanding the experience was. He wasn't learning these things for life. He was learning them in short bursts, under pressure, and then moving on to the next challenge. The filmmakers also pushed technology to its limits in order to support Fox's performance. In later films, Marty had to interact with himself in different versions across timelines. That required Michael J. Fox to appear on screen as multiple characters in the same scene. To make this possible, the team at Industrial Light and Magic created a new device called the Vistaglide, a robotic motion-controlled camera. It allowed scenes with two Martys to look seamless, even as the camera moved naturally. This innovation showed just how far the filmmakers were willing to go to capture Fox's vision of the character. When you put it all together, Fox's journey as Marty McFly was more than acting. It was a crash course in music, sports, and stunts, supported by groundbreaking technology. He gave everything he had to make Marty believable, and audiences rewarded him with lifelong admiration. Still, for all perfection, even Michael J. Fox's brilliance could not keep every slip from sneaking into the movie. One particular mistake survived editing, and once you spot it, you can never unsee it. The bloopers that slipped through time. For all its polish, Back to the Future was not a perfect film. Even with brilliant acting, creative writing, and groundbreaking effects, little mistakes slipped through the cracks. Most audiences never noticed them during their first watch, but eagle-eyed fans eventually started spotting bloopers that became part of the movie's charm. These weren't big enough to ruin the story, yet once you see them, you cannot unsee them. One of the most famous examples comes from the video scene. In the story, Marty shows the 1955 version of Doc Brown a tape recording from the future. On the video, Doc is seen explaining time travel and saying the words, "Never mind that now." But here's the strange part. When Marty was originally filming that recording in 1985, the camera was hanging down by his side and not actually pointed at document. There was no way that line could have been captured on film. Yet when it plays back for the younger Doc, it is there, clear as day. The continuity is completely off, but because the moment is so dramatic, audiences rarely questioned it. Once fans caught on, though, it became one of the most discussed bloopers in the trilogy. Another slip happens with the flyer that reads, "Save the Clock Tower." Marty first gets this flyer from a woman who is campaigning to preserve the Hill Valley Courthouse clock. Later, Jennifer writes a love note on the back of it, and Marty carries it around as a reminder. But if you pay close attention, you will see that the flyer changes appearance throughout the film. In some scenes, it looks brand new and smooth. In others,